music swelled, drowning out the sharp intake of my breath, but it couldn't drown out the sound of his voice in my ear. "Stop watching them, Eliza," Walter whispered, the low rumble of his tone vibrating through my sheer silk dress as the slow song started. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic drum beat against the smooth, tailored wool of his suit jacket pressed against my shoulder. I had been fixed on Jenny and Mark, desperate to project innocent joy for the happy couple, until his large, warm hand settled just above my elbow. It was a casual, possessive gesture that felt anything but casual. When I finally tilted my head up, the look in his eyes was not fatherly or kind or appropriate. It was a dark, consuming focus, demanding only one thing. "Look at me. My name is Eliza Hayes, and for the past 10 years, my life has operated with the quiet, efficient rhythm of a well-maintained commuter train. Everything is on schedule, nothing is spontaneous, and the destination is always known. I live alone in a small apartment in Stamford, Connecticut, the kind of place that smells faintly of old books and ambition I haven't quite met yet. I work as an editor for a small independent publishing house, correcting other people's stories while mine remained largely unwritten. Friday nights were typically reserved for the ritualistic comfort of solitude. I'd cook a decent meal, something that required chopping because the rhythmic action was meditative, and watch old black and white films. It was a life I'd curated carefully after a messy public breakup 3 years ago. The mess was the extraordinary part. The silence that followed was the default. I was 33, perfectly competent, moderately attractive in a way that didn't demand attention, and profoundly, quietly single. I was the person who held the coats at parties, the one who remembered everyone's order, the one who was never the subject of gossip because there was nothing interesting enough to say. I had come to accept this emotional invisibility. It was safer. Expecting nothing meant you were never disappointed, just routinely satisfied. Tonight, however, broke the routine. It was the night of Jenny's wedding. Jenny Peterson, my best friend since kindergarten, was marrying Mark. I loved Jenny deeply, but the wedding felt like an official closing chapter on an era I hadn't realized was ending, an era where we were just girls figuring things out. Now they were solid, paired, and I was the dutiful bridesmaid standing slightly off-center in all the photos. I arrived at the venue, a massive estate repurposed for events, feeling the familiar, low hum of inadequacy the moment I stepped out of the Uber. The silk dress, which had seemed sophisticated in the store mirror, now felt slightly too bright, slightly too much. I checked my phone. No messages. Of course not. Who would message me? I adjusted the small, delicate clutch bag and walked in, mentally running through the checklist. Find Jenny. Smile genuinely. Don't drink too much. And for God's sake, avoid any conversation that included the phrase, "So, are you seeing anyone?" I felt like a functional accessory to the main event, a necessary background detail. It was only fitting that the person who would shatter this carefully constructed normalcy was Jenny's father, Walter Peterson. A man who was a fixture in my life, yet completely untouchable. A man whose silent presence had always been the solid, unmoving backdrop to Jenny's chaos and mine. The accidental situation that threw me into Walter Peterson's orbit was, naturally, related to Jenny's minor crisis management. Halfway through the cocktail hour, Jenny's Aunt Carol, a woman with a flair for the dramatically unnecessary, had misplaced the tiny, antique locket meant to be part of the something old ritual. Jenny, already stressed, was on the verge of tears. "Eliza, please," Jenny pleaded, grabbing my hand. "Dad was supposed to bring it from the safe box at the house this morning, but Aunt Carol swore she had it. She just checked the bathroom near the west wing. Can you go look? He's probably there now, helping her look." I sighed internally. This was exactly the kind of task assigned to the helpful, unattached bridesmaid. The low-stakes emergency that demanded competence, not company. "Sure, Jen. Go enjoy your bubbly. I'll find the cursed heirloom." I maneuvered through the crowd, past tables laden with canapes and sparkling wine, feeling the social current shift around me. The West Wing was quieter, used mainly for storage, and a few isolated powder rooms. It was a reprieve from the relentless cheerfulness of the reception hall. The air here smelled less of roses and more of old marble and polish. I found Aunt Carol first, hovering near the ornate, gilded mirror, her face a mask of frantic worry. "Eliza, darling, thank heavens," she whispered dramatically. "Walter is checking under the sink. He insists it must have fallen there." I nodded, not quite believing the locket, small enough to fit on a pinky finger, had managed to tumble under the heavy stone counter. I entered the powder room. It was empty save for one person. Walter Peterson. He wasn't under the sink. He was standing perfectly still, his tuxedo jacket slightly undone, a silk handkerchief held loosely in one hand. He wasn't even looking at the ground. He was staring out the small, leaded window, watching the sunset bleed across the manicured lawn. He looked utterly detached from the joyful chaos unfolding 50 yards away. The man who owned a major construction firm, who commanded rooms without raising his voice, was frozen in a moment of unexpected quietude, looking less like a powerful businessman and more like a very tired human being. I hesitated at the door. I didn't want to interrupt his peace, whatever it was. He was 49, Jenny's father, a widower for 5 years, and a man I had known peripherally my entire adult life. He represented stability, structure, and everything that was utterly unavailable to me. I was there simply to retrieve a missing piece of jewelry, a circumstance so mundane it felt insulting to his intense stillness. "Mr. Peterson?" I asked softly, forcing a professional, neutral tone. "Jenny sent me. Did we find the locket?" He turned slowly, as if coming back from a long distance. The setting sun caught the silver in his dark hair and the deep exhaustion pooling under his eyes. This was not the intimidating man I knew. This was something else. Something exposed. Walter Peterson turning to face me was less a movement and more a cessation of stillness. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, the kind of man who looked like he spent exactly the right amount of time considering his attire, enough to be polished, not enough to be vain. He carried himself with the inherent weight of someone accustomed to making final decisions. When he was around, the temperature of the room seemed to drop slightly, simply due to the gravitas of his presence. "Eliza. Hello." His voice was low, resonant, the kind that didn't echo but absorbed sound. I always called him Mr. Peterson. He had always called me Eliza. It was the natural, unstated hierarchy between a CEO friend's father and a mere friend. I noticed his tie knot was perfect, a stark contrast to the slight rumple around his eyes. He must have been running on pure adrenaline since dawn, orchestrating the most important day of his daughter's life. "Aunt Carol is still convinced it's here, somewhere," I said, stepping fully into the quiet room. I kept my distance, perhaps 5 feet, a respectful bubble of space. He didn't move toward the sink. He just watched me. "The locket is in the pocket of my coat, which is hanging back in the reception coat room. I misplaced it this morning and forgot to tell Carol. I didn't want to start an incident, so I let her look." A slight, almost imperceptible muscle twitched near his jaw. I offered to check the bathroom myself, just to appease her. His honesty startled me. It wasn't unkind, just supremely pragmatic and slightly manipulative, the kind of efficiency I imagined made him successful in business. "Oh," I managed, feeling suddenly foolish for being drawn into the goose chase. "So, Jenny doesn't need to worry." "Jenny has enough to worry about today," he confirmed. His gaze swept over my face, lingering momentarily on my mouth before returning to my eyes. It wasn't a predatory look. It was assessing, observant, perhaps slightly bored by the spectacle of the wedding itself. Walter Peterson lived in a stratosphere far above mine. His world was corporate mergers, expensive scotch, and the unspoken certainty that everything he touched turned to profit or success. My world was finding the perfect historical footnote for a biography and scraping together enough savings for a decent vacation. He was a force of nature, and I was the grass at the edge of the lawn. His presence here, isolated in this quiet room, felt like an anomaly, like a lighthouse flickering in an open field. I waited for him to dismiss me, to tell me to relay the message and return to the fray. But he didn't. He just stood there, his silence more demanding than any command. I looked down at my hands, feeling the heat rise slightly on my neck. That's when I noticed the fine sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the room being cool. The power figure was, momentarily, stressed beyond his capacity for elegant control. The silence stretched thin, almost vibrating. It was the kind of quiet that usually precedes a major shift in weather, or an unexpected confession. I should have said something, anything. A polite excuse, a return to the party. But my throat felt tight. He was looking at me. Yes, but not in the standard way people look at each other at an event. It was the kind of look that strips away the dress, the makeup, the forced smile, and sees the operating mechanism underneath. "You've known Jenny a long time," he finally stated, his voice devoid of inflection, making it sound more like a fact confirmed than a question asked. "Since kindergarten," I confirmed, shuffling my weight. "She's family." "Yes, family," he repeated, the words sounding strangely heavy coming from him. "You've seen her through everything. You were there when when Sarah was ill." The mention of his late wife, Jenny's mother, was unexpected. I had been a teenager then. But I remembered the quiet despair that had settled over the Peterson house like a dense fog. "She was very strong, Mr. Peterson," I murmured, wanting to shift the subject back to the missing locket or the reception. He took a step closer, not aggressively, but enough that I became acutely aware of the scent of his cologne. Expensive, subtle, sandalwood, and a faint trace of tobacco. The small space of the powder room suddenly felt immense and claustrophobic all at once. "You were strong too, Eliza. Strong for Jenny," he said, his eyes drilling into mine. "You always put her first. You always stood in the background, making sure her light wasn't overshadowed by her obligation to her mother." The air rushed out of my lungs. No one had ever articulated my actions, my quiet, secondary existence, so precisely. It was true. I had spent years being the stable, reliable friend, the one who didn't need saving. I always felt like a necessary supporting character. Was he saying I was invisible? Or was he saying he had actually seen me all this time? My cheeks burned. I was just being a friend. He shook his head, a decisive, subtle movement. "No, you were being you, self-contained, always giving, never expecting a return. It's a very dangerous way to live, Eliza." The intensity of his observation was overwhelming. It crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Friends' fathers didn't analyze your fundamental personality traits at their daughter's wedding. Was I projecting? Was I fabricating meaning where there was only mild, polite adult conversation? I immediately cataloged the entire exchange. 1. He admitted he lied to Aunt Carol. 2. He mentioned his dead wife. 3. He deeply analyzed my psychological disposition. This was not normal small talk. My hands were already trembling, hidden in the folds of my dress. I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years, and the feeling was terrifying. I wanted to retreat, to deploy a casual joke or a deflection, but his presence pinned me in place. The look in his eyes wasn't just assessment now. It was tired, incredibly heavy. He didn't wait for me to respond to his dangerous observation. He simply let the moment breathe, and I saw the formidable CEO facade crack just for a second. He looked away from me, back toward the small window where the last strip of orange light was fading. He sighed, a deep, full exhalation that sounded like he was releasing a week's worth of tension. "It's a beautiful wedding, isn't it?" he asked, but the tone suggested the beauty was entirely superficial, a performance of happiness. Sarah would have loved every detail, every single ridiculous, over-the-top detail. She spent years planning Jenny's hypothetical wedding, even when Jenny was 10 years old. His hand rubbed slowly over the back of his neck, a gesture of profound weariness. "I hate this, Eliza. I hate being the happy father, the successful widower, the man who has everything under control. I'm tired. I'm desperately, thoroughly tired." The raw honesty was like a physical blow. Walter Peterson, the man who moved mountains in Manhattan real estate, was admitting crushing exhaustion to me, the quiet editor. It shifted the entire power dynamic. He was socially dominant, yes, but emotionally, in that small, echoing room, he was suddenly the one exposed, the one needing witness. "I miss having someone to share the quiet moments with," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "Not the galas or the business trips, just the end of the day. The silence in the house now is deafening. Jenny's gone. It's exactly what I wanted for her, what Sarah wanted. But it feels like a final departure. The house will be an empty monument to a life that stopped moving." He wasn't fishing for pity. He was simply stating a painful truth, a truth too burdensome to carry alone inside the reception hall of his daughter's perfect day. I realized then that he saw me because he felt a terrifying kinship with my own quiet solitude. He saw the person who understood the deafening silence after the performance is over. "It's allowed to be hard, Mr. Peterson," I heard myself say, the words simple and true. "It's a massive change." He finally turned back to me, the dark weight lifting slightly, replaced by a momentary flash of something akin to gratitude. "Walter," he corrected, his voice firmer now. "Please." After that confession, I think we can dispense with the formalities. I nodded slowly, feeling the immense weight of the honor, or the burden of his vulnerability. Walter. The name felt heavy on my tongue, too intimate, too close to the line I had spent my entire adult life carefully avoiding. We left the quiet powder room, but we didn't immediately return to the noise of the reception. We found ourselves somehow drifting towards the conservatory, a long, glassed-in hallway filled with potted ferns and the damp, earthy smell of tropical plants. It was dimly lit, relying mostly on the soft glow filtering in from the main ballroom and the faint moonlight shining through the glass roof. It felt safe, neutral, and beautifully secluded. We talked for 20 minutes, leaning against the cold glass wall, the sound of the wedding music muted and distant. We didn't talk about Jenny, or the locket, or business. We talked about silly things. He confessed he hated formal dancing, and often invented excuses to be near the bar during the compulsory slow songs. I admitted that I often preferred editing a badly written manuscript, because fixing something broken felt more satisfying than maintaining something perfect. "You're an architect of stability, then," he observed, a flicker of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. It was the first genuine, unforced smile I'd ever seen him offer. It changed his face completely, softening the sharp angles of command. "Maybe," I shrugged, feeling lighter than I had all evening. "And you're a reluctant dancer." There was a comfortable, silent space between us, not demanding conversation, just presence. I realized I wasn't trying to impress him or make sure I wasn't inconveniencing him. I was simply being me, the quiet editor who liked things fixed, standing next to the powerful man who was tired of performing. At one point, I shivered slightly. The conservatory was cooler than the ballroom, and he immediately, wordlessly, reached for his jacket which he had tossed over a nearby bench. He draped it carefully over my shoulders. The wool was heavy and warm, carrying the distinct scent of his cologne. It felt protective, a barrier between me and the glittering, exhausting world of the party. "Thank you, Walter," I whispered, pulling the lapels closer. "It suits you, Eliza," he said, his eyes meeting mine. The stillness. We weren't talking about the jacket. We were talking about the core of who I was, the part that preferred the background, the quiet, the lack of drama, the part he seemed to not only notice but appreciate. There was no promise in that moment, no declaration of interest. Just the shared understanding that for two people who spent their lives being necessary to others, this small accidental reprieve was true. It was real. It felt more intimate than any passionate kiss, just sharing the air, the silence, and the warmth of a borrowed jacket in the darkness. The warmth of Walter's jacket was seductive, a dangerous comfort. It felt too good, too fitting. And that's when the internal alarm bells started screaming. I looked at the glass reflection of the two of us. Him, the formidable Walter Peterson, leaning casually against the glass, and me, Eliza, draped in his expensive wool, looking less like a bridesmaid and more like a confidant. The sight immediately jarred me back into reality. This was wrong. This was profoundly, unequivocally complicated. He was Walter, Jenny's father. Jenny, my best friend. The social boundaries surrounding this connection were thick, immutable walls. There was the sheer difference in our lives, his empire, my cozy apartment. There was the age difference, which felt less relevant in the quiet conservatory but would be glaringly apparent under the harsh scrutiny of the world. Most importantly, there was Jenny. How could I ever look her in the eye if anything real developed from this accidental intimacy? It felt like a betrayal of the lifetime of friendship we shared. I ran a nervous hand over the satin lining of his jacket sleeve. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the good girl, the reliable one, the one who caused no ripples. A relationship, or even a flirtation with Walter Peterson, would be a tsunami. It would drown my quiet, carefully constructed life in rumor and judgment. I needed to pull back, immediately. I slowly eased the jacket off my shoulders, folding it with deliberate care, trying to make the movement look practical, not panicked. "I should go back inside, Walter," I said, handing the jacket back to him, my voice firmer than I felt. "They'll be starting the first dance soon, and I need to make sure Jenny has her emergency kit." He took the jacket, his eyes tracking my sudden withdrawal. The smile vanished, and the formidable composure returned, the one that made him seem unapproachable. He understood the retreat instantly. He knew exactly what the jacket represented, and he knew why I was rejecting the intimacy of its warmth. "Right, the emergency kit," he repeated, his tone dry, acknowledging the flimsy excuse. He didn't argue, didn't try to stop me. That was Walter's way. Never coercive, always respecting the boundary, even if he didn't agree with it. I turned to leave, walking away from the quiet sanctuary, back towards the blinding lights of the main hall. But before I reached the exit, I heard his voice, sharp and low, cutting through the distant music. "Eliza." I froze, my back still to him. I was terrified of what he might say, of what I might feel if he pushed. This was the moment I was supposed to run, to save myself the heartache and the inevitable fallout. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against the silk of my dress. I kept my back to him, praying I looked composed, professional, and entirely detached. The distance between us, maybe 10 feet, felt like a chasm I couldn't cross again. "Yes, Walter?" I managed, my voice strained. He didn't move. I could feel his gaze on my spine, a heavy, tangible presence that defied the space separating us. The distant orchestra began tuning for the next dance, a muffled, romantic melody. "You're right to be cautious," he stated, his voice calm, measured, devoid of the earlier weariness. This was the CEO speaking, the man who calculated risk perfectly. "You value your routine. You value your peace. I respect that, But don't confuse caution with self-denial, Eliza. I tightened my jaw, ready to throw up another wall of polite deflection. I don't know what you mean, Walter. I should really go. He spoke again, cutting through my internal monologue, his words simple and devastating. I haven't seen a woman truly see me since Sarah. Not the money, not the title, not the grief, but just the man who needs quiet at the end of the day. You see him, don't you? I swallowed hard, unable to deny it. And I have been watching you for years, he continued, the low volume of his confession making it feel intensely private, not like a friend's daughter. I saw how you carried yourself after your own heartbreak. You didn't shatter. You just polished your life until it shone with careful restraint. I watched you always standing just outside the light, making sure Jenny was the star. He took one slow step forward, closing the smallest fraction of the distance. The first dance is starting. Jenny and Mark are about to be the focus of everyone in that room. You're going to be in the background again. But I am not going to be watching them, Eliza. I don't want to watch them anymore. He paused, letting the implication settle, the gravity of his choice weighing the air. Then came the phrase that demolished all my defenses, the simple recognition I never dared to hope for. I want to watch you. I want you to stop standing by, watching other people live their extraordinary lives. I want you to look at me and understand that I have been waiting for someone like you, someone real, to finally step out of the shadows. I'm choosing you, Eliza, if you let me. The words, I'm choosing you, reverberated in the silent conservatory. They weren't a plea for romance or a pass for lust. They were a statement of intent, an acknowledgement of my very existence, shattering the decade I had spent feeling quietly invisible. I slowly turned, facing him fully now. My composure was gone, replaced by a mixture of shock and a desperate rising hope. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked at Walter, truly looked at the depth of his dark eyes, and saw the risk he was taking too. This wasn't just my quiet life he was threatening. It was his carefully guarded reputation, the respect he commanded. He was choosing to be vulnerable with me. I don't know what to say, Walter, I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. This is completely impossible. You're Jenny's father. You're Walter Peterson. He didn't flinch. I am a man who sees you, Eliza. Those other titles don't matter in this room right now. I know the complication. I am not asking you to deny it. I am asking you to accept that the risk of complication might be worth it, for once. I took a shaky step toward him. My mind was racing, cataloging all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The gossip, the age, the sheer implausibility of it all. But beneath the surface, a deeper, undeniable feeling was beginning to assert itself. The relief of being chosen, the sheer intoxicating feeling of being seen by the one person I had always admired from a safe distance. I am terrified, I confessed, the words raw. I've spent so long being safe. I don't know how to handle extraordinary things, Walter. I'm afraid I'll disappoint you, or that I'll break whatever quiet thing this is before it even starts. He reached out, his hand not touching me, but hovering near my cheek, a careful boundary of respect. You won't disappoint me, Eliza. The only thing you could do to break this is to run back to your quiet life just because it's easier. I am not asking for certainty. I am asking for honesty. Are you willing to feel this, just for a moment, and see where it goes? I looked back at the glittering ballroom lights visible through the glass. Jenny was likely twirling now, perfectly happy, surrounded by her future. My life of functional routine felt suddenly dull and small in comparison to the promise of intensity Walter offered. I inhaled deeply, letting the expensive scent of his proximity fill my senses. The careful restraint I had mastered for years dissolved. "Yes," I whispered, the single word a quiet declaration of war against my own caution. "I'm willing to see where it goes. But if we do this, Walter, we move slowly. We move honestly. And we start by dancing." Walter's expression shifted, the intensity in his eyes deepening into something that looked dangerously close to relief. He didn't smile triumphantly, just gave a subtle, affirming nod, acknowledging the magnitude of my decision. The tension between us, which had been thick and painful moments ago, now settled into a quiet hum of expectation. He extended his hand. It wasn't a demanding gesture, simply an invitation. His palm was broad and warm against mine. I didn't hesitate this time. My fingers laced with his, the contact immediate and electric. This simple connection felt like the most extraordinary thing I had ever done. "We start by dancing," he agreed, his thumb gently tracing the lines of my knuckles. The first step back into the chaos. Together. We walked out of the quiet, dim conservatory and back toward the brilliant lights of the reception hall. The first dance had just finished, and the dance floor was now opening up to the guests. The volume of the music was a physical shock after the silence. We didn't release hands. We didn't exchange any more words. We simply navigated the edge of the crowd, our shoulders occasionally brushing. He led us toward a quieter corner, near the huge fireplace, not to hide, but to observe. We were still in the room, fulfilling our roles as required. I, the bridesmaid, he, the father of the bride. But we were operating in our own private bubble of shared truth. "I need to know," I murmured, leaning slightly closer to be heard over the band. "Did you really bring the locket with you?" A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Of course. It's a habit, Eliza. I don't usually start something I haven't planned for, even if I hadn't planned the consequences." He didn't just see me. He was honest with me. That meant everything. He pulled me into a slow, almost imperceptible movement, a gentle sway that didn't demand attention. We weren't truly dancing, not in the formal sense, but our bodies were moving in sync, a perfect, contained rhythm amidst the larger party. We were standing in plain sight, doing what we were supposed to be doing. But everything had changed. He kept his grip firm, grounded. I didn't watch Jenny and Mark anymore. I didn't look at the crowd, or the judgmental Aunt Carol, or the safety of the door. I looked at Walter. His eyes, the fatigue gone, now held an exhilarating focus. He saw me, and he wanted me to see him too. The rest of the wedding faded into background noise. The uncertainty was overwhelming. The complication was immense. But the feeling of stepping out of the shadows and into the warmth of his steady gaze felt like finally coming home. The beginning wasn't an ending, but a silent promise. We haven't defined this path, and the world outside this ballroom is waiting to judge every misstep. But for now, here we are, at the quiet start of something that should never have happened, at the end of someone else's perfect beginning. Tell me, what do you think they talked about next? Drop your best guesses in the comments below. If this story of forbidden proximity and being finally seen resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of an ordinary life becoming extraordinary.